Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Severance Season 2, Episode 8, Sweet Vitriol. Now, this is the shortest episode of the show ever, only being at 37 minutes, and it is a full Harmony Cobell episode, which, like I said in my last review, it's been forever since we saw her, so it was definitely the right timing to bring her in. I feel like where this episode suffers a bit is in its pacing and maybe feeling kind of short of the mark in what we just saw the last episode in comparison, but I feel like this is kind of a product of not having us check in with Harmony a lot during the season and what she's up to, and they saved it for one episode so it wouldn't interrupt the flow of other episodes, especially one like last week. So what you kind of pay the price with that is trying to catch us up now with Harmony all in one episode, which isn't the most fascinating stuff, but there is a lot of good lore stuff here, which I'm going to break down right now. But we see that she ends up going to Salt's Neck, which she was originally hesitant to do, and now she's fully going through with it. And you see the opening shots, this body of water and all these seagulls flying, and it's very reminiscent of the art, animation, everything we've seen of Kier. It looks like that type of town he's in those pictures surrounded by bodies of water, and we always see the seagulls and him even turning into a seagull in the computer animation. So this feels like a town that's just way back in Kier time if we're to think where Kier actually was. But now this town is completely run down, and the town is shown to you and the people that they're run down by the product of Lumon. The first man Harmony literally sees in this town is huffing a mysterious substance. And while this is happening, she gets her first call from Devin. Now, I want to bring up, too, before I get into everything going with Harmony and this town, that I saw a lot of commenters last week saying how it was kind of ridiculous that Devin would call Harmony, and it was a little out of character. And the more I thought about it, I tend to actually agree with this statement. I think that the more I think about where Devin was with Harmony and how protective Devin is of Mark, and she's usually been seen as arguably the smartest character on the show, it does feel like it's a real stretch that she's just aggressively calling Harmony for help. I feel like there's a better way this show could have gone about them working together, where this episode leads up to at the end, where I think it did a good job of getting Harmony there, but I don't think it did a good job of getting Devin to that point, or even Mark to even want to get on the phone with her. Now, Harmony goes to the Drippy Pot Cafe. This is where we'll meet the waiter, Hampton, and this waiter gives someone who's a customer there some of that mysterious substance, so you see he's actually dealing it, and at first he's really not happy to see Harmony, and for him, Harmony's a trigger of his traumatic past. She's like, I need a favor, meet me at the factory. So while he's driving to the factory, we see he passes a building with a faded Lumon on it, and then we actually see the big factory with the faded Lumon Industries logo on it. So all these things aren't actually in operation anymore. Now we learn the favor is to drive Harmony to Sissy's because she doesn't want Lumon to recognize her car if they're watching Sissy's house, which is technically also the house she grew up in. You see that Hampton will say, you know, she still lives by the 9. And Harmony's like, I assumed. And the 9, what is that referencing? It's referencing the 9 principles of Kier. And then he says, you know, because of that she's a pariah here, which is an interesting thing to say to Harmony, because I still believe Harmony also values those 9 principles, but in a different, less extreme way. Because remember, Harmony's prayer in the beginning of season 1, episode 6 is, tame me in the tempers 4 that I may serve the evermore, place me in the values 9 that I may feel thy touch divine. So that has always been there for Harmony. I think where Harmony, as it's shown and really highlighted well in this episode, the divide is her seeing the BS of Lumon's part of Kier, that she's a believer in the religious part, the spiritual part of Kier, but not about the industry part of it, and how that kind of corrupted a lot of what she believes in and what Lumon's actually doing. And why she would be jaded gets explained within the episode, which we'll get to. But it's interesting they bring up these 9 principles again. There's so many parts in the show they've kind of shown them a bit. We see more of the temper stuff, but it's really cool that all the principles are actually on the whip at Dylan's waffle party. And also remember, Helena said she recited them every night before bed. Her father made her do that. Now, Hampton will ask Harmony, why would he help her? And she says, well, we were chums, colleagues. So he says back, you mean child effing labor. So this is big reveal, and this is something that's been hinted at so much that, like Scientology, where they recruit young and they have them going in these programs, which is very similar to this Wintertide program that gets brought up here, that this company of Lumon did child labor. It had Harmony there with Hampton, and they were working in these factories around chemicals. And you see Harmony brings up how Kier and Imogen met at this ether mill. And on Reddit, I found someone posted ether was used starting in 1846 to put people to sleep during operations. Then someone follows up on that post saying there's a classification of many chemical compounds for ether, but the one that is used as an anesthetic is diethyl ether, which sounds like Dieter, which is crazy because then you see the title of the episode is called Sweet Vitriol. You see that vitriol is what they're taking and inhaling in this episode. And what's crazy about it being that it's actually diethyl ether is that connection someone put that it sounds like Dieter. So it's really hinting in that story of Kier that he was actually getting chemically high in his experience there, and that if he even had a twin brother, which is to be seen. So this is where it really screwed up the town. It makes you question all of Kier's philosophies and how much he was writing all this while he was really, really high from the vitriol. And I mean, you've seen this in past where people talk about certain religions and think that maybe certain things they said they experienced, they didn't realize that maybe they were high on mushrooms at the time or were just high on anything around them and not realizing it was affecting them and having these visions. And when she brought this story up of Imogen and Kier, that Hampton responded to Harmony, was she hacking up a lung at the time talking about Imogen? And she's like, I can smell it on your breath, pathetic. So it's admitting how this affected them growing up, working around this stuff and making them sick. But it's also admitting it gave them this high and made a lot of addicts in this town, and that she's calling them pathetic for actually still doing it. I just want to say, too, I love the sunset shot that Ben Stiller gets here when they're pulling up to Harmony's childhood home. Really, really looks like an actual painting. And when Harmony gets to the house and we meet Sissy, Sissy's like, I don't want that puff peddler near me. And she's like, well, you gave him a thirst for it. But the way she's responding, Sissy, to that stuff is showing me that people in that Kier philosophy were in denial of the aspect of the actual compound of vitriol and how effect it might have had even on Kier. Now, Harmony's old room is completely empty, and you see that she was tracking her height and it stopped at age 12, a nice subtle way of telling you that she left for this Wintertide program when she was 12. That is when she left the home. It's a big part of her guilt about what happened with her mother, who was sick, and she wasn't able to be there for her. Bigger part of that is that we learn her mother was against Lumon and wasn't a believer in Kier. So it would add even more to the guilt that Harmony feels that maybe she was in this trance and that there was some wrong things of her going through with it and how extreme it is for her as a kid to go there, and maybe her mom was actually in the right. But you wonder how her mom let her go to the Wintertide program. So there's a story here missing about a father figure. Now, we learned from Sissy that Drummond called, and this is confirming Cobell's fears that they're after her, they're keeping a watchful eye on her. So she wants the key to her mother's room to get something. And I love that Sissy responds, why do you bring nothing but woe into my life? I love when they say nasty things to each other, but in this like Kier language. And you see then Harmony will eventually say to her, talking about the mom, she said nothing after you pulled the tube from her gullet, and then she slaps her. So that is where she blames Sissy for not taking care of her mom properly, but we'll get more info on that later. But you see that Sissy says there was gratitude in her eyes to be freed from her suffering. If she'd only been a believer, perhaps she would have found solace in the 9. So that's why I think she's way off even reading her mom, and that she probably found gratitude in getting off of that feeding tube that I'm going to bring up, which is crazy. But there's this Lexington letter that was written by the co-creators, and it is totally canon to the show. And it's a experience of someone who was in MDR before, and they mentioned that the Nashville Tribune was sued to oblivion on their expose of Lumon feeding tube devices. So I think she knew the Lumon feeding tube that Sissy probably got for her was faulty, and that she also was sick of living with someone under this cult, and that was the relief of her going out. So you see Harmony's talking about how I would have cared for her myself had I been in school. I didn't get to say goodbye. And that explains where she would be in her mindset about it, and I would feel guilt because of it. And Sissy's like, your studies are more important. Mr. Egan saw Kier in you. She mentions she was in the Wintertide Fellowship, and she says that even at the factory, no apprentice was as industrious as you. And she says, such a disappointment you've proven to be. So you see that she was like the golden child in this program. We'll see later on in the yearbook she had valedictorian, and to be compared to Kier is huge. And it's also interesting when they mentioned the Wintertime Fellowship, we've heard about this with Miss Wong, who's kind of going down a similar path, obviously, of Miss Cobell, and that she is a child working at Lumon, and that she's trying to get in this program, because remember Milchick's the one who has to approve her to get to the next level. So what we see Miss Wong going through will probably be a lot of similar things Harmony's been through. Now, when she asks her, what did Drummond tell you when he called? Sissy says, return and plead forgiveness, child. The Egan's will grant it. And she says, and show me mercy, just like you did with Mother. So she's alluding to that she thinks they'll actually kill her. It's also creepy that Sissy's just rubbing Akir Stone while this is all happening. And then we'll see Harmony goes up to Sissy's room. Now we'll see that Sissy has these like tarot-like cards of the 9 in her Kier shrine. She has the 4 temper heads that we saw from the waffle party. The jester being Frolic, veiled woman being Woe, woman in black being Dread, and Malice is the goat. We love goats in this show. And that card that says you must cut to heal, which we've seen that quote a lot in this show, obviously referencing to Severance, and much more in the philosophy of cutting the tempers out of your life. So she gets the key, gets into her mom's room, and you see she has the picture of little Harmony we saw in Harmony's shrine, which is a lot for Harmony to take in. It's a big moment because her mom wasn't a believer, but she still loved Harmony, and she sees that through and through. That stayed there, which is huge. And this is all things to bring into this redemption arc for Harmony and to change her views in this show. So Harmony grieves intensely in the bed. She's also racked of guilt. You see that Hampton says he liked the mom because she hated Lumon more than he did. So her mom being like that gives you hope for Harmony that somewhere inside of her, she's got to find that voice that her mom had. Hampton will ask Harmony if she wants to get high. So she inhales the vitriol. She's like, I haven't done that since I was 8. So they were doing this while they were working. And then that's why he says, you ready to man the vat for 10 hours, giving you that idea of what they were doing right after. But then Harmony, as Harmony is, always has these weird moments of back to weird Harmony things, like her just saying to him, it's so shameful that you sell it. Really weird how she can just tap back into that voice that's very judgmental like her sister. But they kiss, so there was definitely obviously something there in the past. And then Harmony checks the outhouse. This is where she finds what she's looking for. But I love the old yearbooks called Annual Reminiscences. And we'll see on the statue of James Egan, it says Year of Wiles. This is crazy because on the certificate outside of Sissy's room, they had it say Year of Vision. So they had years dedicated to one principle. But inside that statue is the big reveal of her blueprints. So Harmony is actually the mastermind behind Severance and the technology of it. But before we even get more into that, you see that when she tells Sissy she is leaving, she's like, don't tell them I was here. And Sissy says, I would never bear a falsity to the Egans. Another thing that reminds me of Scientology, because in Scientology, they're told, even if it's a family member, even if it's a loved one that leaves Scientology, you're supposed to shun them completely, and you have to report if they do something that's against Scientology. So this would make total sense if you're in some kind of brainwashing that Sissy is in, that she would sell her own sister out. But you see that Harmony says back, Lumon destroyed this town. You owe them no loyalty, which is showing you where Harmony's mindset is, and that she is able to separate that kind of business side of things, and that Lumon is separate from Kier and Kier's philosophy, that's its own entity if you look at it that way. I think that's how Harmony looks at it completely, and that she doesn't trust Lumon at all, doesn't like Lumon, and doesn't really like the Egans. But I still think that's always going to be a part of her, the philosophy of it. So if you're looking at a turning point for her, is that she uses it towards more good and drops all the things that have been made in Lumon. But we see how Harmony made it all, even the OTC, the Glasgow block, the base code, and James Egan, we know, is the one who has the credit for this. And that's why Sissy's like, why have you never spoken of this? She says, I was told Kier's knowledge is for all. That if I saw credit, I would be banished. So that's what she's always had hanging over the Egans, this truth. And this was huge as she gets the blueprints because of that. She can prove that. And Sissy immediately tries to burn it. And Sissy says, it was her hand that removed the tube, not mine. Your mother was a coward. And she says she was more sick in the soul than in the body, filled with malice and resentment, which is totally not the case. And she says, I tried to help you grow. You are a weed, just as she was. So super cruel. But this is huge information that Harmony has. It's also huge information we learned. Harmony is this genius, honestly, creating this technology and all these parts of it. And of course she'd be mad that someone would take all the credit for that. But it was her teachings that made her be okay with it, even though deep down it was probably breaking her. But that break and what's bothering her deep down is what's going to get someone to turn. That's how people usually get out of cults, is following that. And that part of it in this episode showing you too about her mom still loving her and her mom not believing in it at all. Now, she leaves. Devin gives info to Harmony how Mark now is reintegrated. So she's caught her up, and Mark even gets on the phone, and Cobell says to him, tell me everything. So you see them playing with Firewoman, that she is motivated now. She's definitely going to go towards their way. I don't think she's totally trustworthy, but I do think she will help in some way, and then maybe just kind of disappear. We'll see. But overall, I'm going to give this episode a 7.5. I have a couple things about it. I think the short run time wasn't great for this show. It made you feel like wanting more too much, or you're like, okay, can we get a little more meat to the bone? The big reveal is with Harmony about her mother not being a believer, and that Harmony created all of this technology, a part of it. But other than that, I do think that the character of Hampton wasn't the best, and I'm not crazy about the mumble acting he was doing, where I had to turn my volume up and subtitles up like really high to understand anything he was saying. And it was a little too dark, the episode, and I'm not talking about the tone, I'm talking about the visuals of it, where I couldn't even see a lot of the performance here in this episode, that a lot of it was framed where their just faces were covered in dark, and I could not see their performances. So a little frustrating on that part with the directing by Ben Stiller. And I overall think this is one of the weakest episodes of the show to date. So it's like a total come down from last week, which was a masterpiece, to this. And I think they just kind of wrote themselves into this trap because of not touching in with Harmony, which makes sense because you don't want to interrupt a lot of those episodes, but this is what you're paying for, that, right? That you got to do a whole episode to maybe not the most interesting stuff, but the lore stuff of it's really cool. It's just the episode as a whole is probably really, really forgettable. It really is a big exposition kind of dump here, and you're learning stuff you didn't know, but it's stuff that you could probably do in a shorter time or spread out and sprinkle in through other episodes if you went that route. Maybe it would have worked better, maybe not. But what I've seen this episode and its enjoyment factor, I'm giving it a 7.5, just wasn't the best. And it's still now bothering me more and more how much I just don't believe Devin and even Mark would be down to trust Harmony yet. Like, there had to be something else they learned about her that she would have even told them, begging them for her to trust her. That would bring them into it. So that really hasn't been there. So let me know what you thought down below, though. I love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. Try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you miss one of my reviews of Severance. I also do White Lotus as well. And I'll see you next time.